I used to believe that family was the safest place in the world, until the day my granddaughter got married, and I realized I had become nothing more than a walking wallet in the eyes of the people I loved most. Before we dive into all of this, let us know in the comments where you're watching this video from. Connecting with viewers across the world is a huge source of inspiration for us. The soft chime of bells echoed as I stepped into the grand hall of the Hollow Pines Inn, a place draped in white roses and gauzy ribbons for my granddaughter Lily's wedding. Everything looked beautiful. Everything felt rehearsed. It should have been one of those days I'd remember with warmth, the kind you tuck away like a pressed flower in a favorite book. A celebration of family. A reminder of love continuing through the generations. And in a way, it was all of that. Just not in the way I'd imagined. I was early, of course. Always early. At 65, I needed time. Time to adjust, to catch my breath, and if I'm honest, to gather the courage to be surrounded by so many smiling faces that I wasn't sure still saw me as a person, and not just a purse. My husband Henry had passed 3 years before. Cancer. Swift. Cruel. He always said I'd outlive him because I had the stronger heart. I used to laugh when he said that. Now, it didn't feel like a blessing, it felt like a weight. That morning, I'd taken extra care getting ready. Not because I'm vain, I never have been, but because I wanted to feel presentable, visible. I wore a soft powder blue dress, the one Henry always said brought out my eyes. I curled my silver hair, just the way he used to like it, and spritzed the faintest touch of lavender perfume, the same bottle he gave me on our last anniversary. When I looked into the mirror before leaving, I whispered to myself, "You look lovely, Maggie." And I imagined Henry whispering it too. The ceremony had been lovely. Lily was radiant, walking down the aisle with her father, David, my son. He looked proud, if a little stiff. Carolyn, my daughter-in-law, dabbed her eyes with a lace handkerchief, and for a moment, I believed we were a family again. United, if just for a day. Then came the reception. It was held in the ballroom of the Hollow Pines Inn, a grand space with chandeliers that twinkled like frost. I made my way to the welcome table, where a young woman with a clipboard smiled brightly. "Name, please?" she asked cheerfully. "Margaret Walker," I said, offering a polite smile. She flipped through a stack of name cards, perfectly arranged in alphabetical order, and handed me one with a practiced flourish. "Here you are." I took it without looking, expecting to see Margaret Walker, grandmother of the bride. Instead, my hand froze midair. In elegant cursive, it read, "The old lady who pays for everything." I stared at it, dumbfounded. Surely, this was a mistake. A joke? Number? A cruel lapse in judgment. That's what it had to be. The young woman's smile faltered. "Is something wrong, ma'am?" I swallowed hard, forcing a smile. No, just a mix-up, I think." She reached for another stack, flustered. "Let me double-check." "It's fine," I interrupted gently. I didn't want a scene. Not at Lily's wedding. I carefully pinned the name tag to my dress and walked into the ballroom, feeling the weight of those words like a rock on my chest. I smiled at people. I chatted politely. But the name tag burned through the fabric like acid. I couldn't help but wonder, did Lily know? Did David? Carolyn? I told myself it didn't matter. Maybe it was a mistake. A weird joke by someone who didn't know better. Then I heard the laughter. Near the bar, 2 guests young, careless were snickering. "Did you see her tag?" one whispered. "She actually wore it," the other laughed. Carolyn said it would be hilarious. My hands trembled. I turned to leave, to find air, to find a corner where I could breathe, when I heard David's voice. "Mama, come meet the Andersons' dad used to golf with Bill." I turned back. David waved me over enthusiastically, a group of well-dressed guests beside him. One of the men gave me a nod. "This must be your mom, David." "Yes," David grinned. "Our mobile bank account." The group chuckled lightly, thinking it harmless. My smile stayed in place by sheer will. "Margaret Walker," I said firmly, extending my hand. "Henry's wife." The man's face softened. "Of course. Henry spoke of you often. He was so proud of you." The conversation moved on without me. I stood there, ears buzzing, heart pounding, mind spinning. Later, I found David alone. I held up the name tag. "Do you think this is funny?" He laughed. Not maliciously, just dismissively. "Oh, come on, Mom. It's just a joke. Everyone knows you're the generous one. You paid for the whole wedding. And that makes this okay? It's not that serious. Don't ruin the mood." Before I could answer, Carolyn appeared beside us, perfectly poised in her designer dress. "There you are, Maggie. Have you met everyone? We just wanted folks to know who made all of this possible." She winked. They both smiled. I excused myself. In the quiet of the restroom, I leaned against the sink and looked at myself in the mirror again. Same dress, same perfume, but the woman staring back at me looked smaller now, diminished. Then I heard a gentle knock on the door. "Mrs. Walker?" A voice called from outside. "It's Samuel Clark, Henry's lawyer. Could I speak with you for a moment?" Samuel Clark had always carried himself like a man with secrets too heavy for his pockets. That morning, standing just outside the women's restroom, he looked as though one of those secrets had finally begun to itch. I opened the door slowly, unsure if I wanted company, even familiar company. But when I saw his face, the concern creasing his brow, I gave a slight nod and stepped out into the hallway. "I'm sorry to bother you here," he said, eyes apologetic. "It's just, there's something I've been carrying around for a while now. Something from Henry." The sound of his name always stirred something in my chest. A sharpness, a warmth, a longing that never quite left. I folded my arms across myself, bracing. Samuel reached into the inner pocket of his tailored blazer and pulled out a small envelope-aged, cream-colored, sealed with red wax. He held it out like a sacred offering. "He gave this to me a few weeks before he passed. He said, 'Give this to Maggie only if she ever finds herself mistreated.' His exact word." I hesitated. "Did he say what was inside?" He shook his head. "Only that it was an amendment to his will. A codicil clause." I blinked. "A what?" "A legal addition to a will. It's rare, but binding." He lowered his voice. "It outlines consequences for certain behaviors by heirs. Specifically, public humiliation or disrespect toward you." I stared at him. "You're telling me Henry put in a legal clause to punish David and Carolyn if they insulted me?" "If any of his descendants publicly demeaned or disrespected you," Samuel said carefully, "they would forfeit their inheritance." The hallway suddenly felt very small. The name tag on my dress pressed against my chest like a bruise. My fingers trembled as I took the envelope. "Why didn't you give this to me sooner?" "Henry hoped it would never be necessary," Samuel replied gently. "He wanted to believe love would be enough." Love. That tired old word, we say it like it's a blanket. But sometimes it's just tissue paper over a storm. "I'll let you decide, Winner, if you want to use it," Samuel said, stepping back. "But Maggie, what happened with that name tag? Henry would have been furious." So was I. But it wasn't fury that guided me. Not then. Not yet. When I returned to the reception, I moved differently. Not with shame, but with a quiet resolve curling itself around my spine. I no longer looked for approval in David's eyes or warmth in Carolyn's smile. I watched them both from a distance, the envelope burning a hole in my purse. The next morning, I sat at my kitchen table, still in my robe, the name tag lying flat in front of me. The elegant handwriting now seemed mocking. "The old lady who pays for everything." I traced the letters with one finger, wondering what Henry would have said if he'd seen it. Then I walked to the living room. Drawn like a string was pulling me. Above the fireplace hung our family portrait taken 5 years ago for our 40th anniversary. Henry sat in the center, still hardy despite the early signs of illness. I stood beside him, one hand resting on his shoulder. David and Carolyn flanked us. Lily and Noah stood in front so young then. So unaware. We looked like a family. What changed? I asked the question aloud as if Henry might answer. Maybe nothing had changed. Maybe I had just finally opened my eyes. That day, I pulled out a dusty old file box from the hallway closet. Inside were folders bank statements, canceled checks, donation receipts. Proof. Pages and pages of financial support I had provided for David and Carolyn since Henry died. $30,000 for a kitchen remodel, $25,000 for Lily's first year of college, 18 for Noah's car when he turned 18. 50 for a family trip to Europone I wasn't even invited to join. $250,000. And I had never said no. Never even hesitated. I had called it love. My phone rang, jarring me out of the math. It was Carolyn. Margaret! Her voice was sugar and butter. We just wanted to say thank you again for everything yesterday. It was a beautiful day, and we couldn't have done it without you. I mumbled something polite. Actually, she continued, I had a quick question. Mark's parents were supposed to pay for the honeymoon, but they're having some business trouble. Lily's devastated. We were wondering if you might be willing to step in just 2 weeks in Bali. Nothing extravagant. My throat tightened. I'll think about it. She paused. Oh, okay. We just need to book soon to get the good rates. I understand. I'll let you know tomorrow. When I hung up, I didn't feel guilty. I felt awake. Later that evening, Noah knocked on my door. Hey, Grandma, he said, pulling me into a hug. I texted you, but you didn't answer. Everything okay? He was 21 now, as tall as his grandfather, with Henry's gentle eyes. He followed me into the kitchen, watching as I filled the kettle. I wanted to say I'm sorry, he said, sitting down. About yesterday. The name tag. The way people talked. It wasn't right. I sat across from him, placing 2 mugs on the table. You noticed? Of course I did. And so did a lot of other people. I should have said something, I just didn't know how. I reached across and patted his hand. It's not your job to fix your parents, but it is your job to stand up for what's right. He looked at me then. Really looked. They've changed, Grandma. Since Grandpa died. Or maybe they were always like this and I just didn't see it. He hesitated. They were talking last week. About your house. About how it's too big for one person. They were saying how they might help you downsize. Move you somewhere like Sunrise Acres. My blood ran cold. Sunrise Acres was a retirement facility. Nice, yes, but not my home. I poured the hot water, letting the steam give me a moment to think. Noah's voice broke through my thoughts. You sure you're okay? I'm better than okay, I said softly. I think I'm finally seeing clearly for the first time in a long time. And I meant it. Noah stayed for dinner. Just a simple roast chicken and vegetables, but it was the best meal I'd had in months. He listened as I shared what I'd been holding inside years of requests. The slow erosion of respect. The loneliness of being needed but not seen. When he left, I watched him walk down the path. His shoulders broad, his gait sure. He wasn't like the others. Not yet. But a seed of doubt tugged at me. Was he truly different? Or had entitlement merely skipped a generation? I would need to watch, to wait, to see who deserved the legacy Henry had left behind. 3 days later, David and Carolyn hosted a post-wedding brunch at their country club. I debated not going. But curiosity got the better of me. I needed to know, was the name tag a fluke or a symptom? I wore a cream-colored suit Henry had always said made me look like royalty. When I entered the private dining room, the chatter hushed slightly. Carolyn greeted me with a kiss on the cheek, surprised by my appearance. Margaret, you look different. I smiled. Thank you. She led me to a seat far from Lily and Ethan, next to Mark's parents, whom I barely knew. As brunch progressed, Carolyn clinked her glass for attention. We'd like to thank everyone for coming and making Lily and Ethan's day so special, she said with a practiced smile. And, of course, a special thank you to Margaret, without whom none of this would be possible. She turned to me, eyes gleaming. And now, we're thrilled to announce that she's generously sponsoring their honeymoon in Bali. All heads turned. I set down my coffee. This is the first I'm hearing of that, I said calmly. Ahush fell. Well, we talked about it yesterday, Carolyn said with a laugh. You said you'd think about it. I did. And I'm still thinking. David leaned in, stage whispering. Mom, don't do this. We already told them they could book. And something in me snapped. I don't recall agreeing to pay for a honeymoon in Bali, I said, loud enough for all to hear. In fact, I believe Mark's parents were supposed to handle that. Carolyn's face turned crimson. They had some financial issues. I understand. but I don't think it's appropriate to volunteer someone else's money in public. The room was silent. Perhaps Lily and Ethan might consider a simpler honeymoon, one within their means. My means? Carolyn hissed. No, I said. Theirs. David grabbed my arm, fingers digging in. Stop it, Mom. You're embarrassing us. I pulled my arm free. No, David, you've embarrassed yourselves. I rose from the table, smoothing my jacket. Lily, Ethan, I wish you joy. I'd be happy to help with a modest honeymoon, privately. But this? This ends now. If you're still watching, comment 1 so I know you're still with me. 3 days after Lily's wedding, I found myself standing at the entrance of the Oak Ridge Country Club, hesitating just a beat too long. The invitation to the post-wedding brunch had arrived in the form of a breezy group text from Carolyn. Brunch at Oak Ridge. Casual, family only. Come hungry. I wasn't sure why I was there. Curiosity, maybe. Or a final sense of duty. Or perhaps a quiet urge to see if what happened at the wedding had been an exception or a pattern. The valet took my car with a smile, and I walked up the steps in a cream-colored suit Henry had always said made me look like a queen without trying. My hair was softly styled, my lipstick a rosewood shade that matched the lining of my jacket, a small, deliberate change from the softer tones I used to favor. Inside, I was greeted by the hush of expensive carpet and the clink of mimosa glasses. The private dining room buzzed with polite laughter. I recognized some of the guests from the wedding. Lily and Ethan stood near the windows, chatting with friends. Noah was seated at the far end of the room, talking to someone I didn't recognize. Mom! Over here! David's voice, too loud and too familiar, cut across the room. He waved me over to the main table, where Carolyn sat in a coral designer dress that likely cost more than most people's rent. Alice, you look radiant, she said with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. It's Margaret, I corrected gently, slipping into the seat they'd saved for me strategically placed beside Ethan's parents and several degrees removed from Lily. We exchanged pleasantries. I smiled and nodded. I sipped my coffee, but tasted nothing. For a while, it went smoothly enough. Light chatter about the wedding, the weather, Carolyn's Pilates instructor. But then she stood, lifted her glass, and tapped it with a manicured nail. Everyone, she said, voice poised and rehearsed. David and I just want to thank you for joining us this morning to celebrate our children's beautiful union. It truly was a magical day. Polite applause followed. And, of course, she continued, turning toward me with a practiced smile, we owe a special thank you to Margaret, who generously made so much of this possible. A murmur of agreement rippled through the table. And now, she added with a sparkle in her eye, we're thrilled to share that Margaret has also graciously offered to sponsor Lily and Ethan's honeymoon 2 beautiful weeks in Bali. The room broke into scattered applause, champagne flutes raised, smiles all around. Except mine. I slowly set down my cup, careful not to clink it. I'm sorry, I said, my voice steady. This is the first I've heard of that. The silence was immediate. Carolyn blinked. Oh, well, we talked about it. Yesterday. You said you'd think about it. I did say that, I agreed. And I'm still thinking. David leaned in, voice low but carrying. Mom, don't do this here. We already told them they could book it. I looked directly at him, feeling something deep within me settle like an anchor dropping into place. I don't remember agreeing to fund a honeymoon in Bali, I said calmly. In fact, I seem to recall that Ethan's parents had planned to cover that. They ran into business trouble, Carolyn said quickly. We thought it best not to burden them. I see, I replied. But I don't believe it's appropriate to volunteer someone else's money without their consent. The room had gone completely still. Lily looked confused. Ethan stared at his plate. Perhaps, I added, Lily and Ethan might consider a honeymoon that suits their own budget. Carolyn's jaw tensed. Your budget is certainly not the problem here. No, I said, meeting her gaze. But it's no longer your decision to spend it. David's hand shot out, gripping my forearm. His touch was firm, almost painful. Mom, please, he hissed. You're embarrassing us. I calmly pulled my arm away. No, David. You've embarrassed yourselves. I stood. Lily. Ethan. I wish you joy. I would be happy to contribute toward a modest honeymoon privately. But I will not be manipulated into funding something that was never discussed with me directly. The silence was thick and stunned. Carolyn's face had gone crimson. David's was unreadable. I'll take my leave, I said, turning from the table. Noah rose quietly and followed. I'll walk you out, he said, placing a supportive hand on my back. Once in the quiet hallway, I exhaled. My hands were shaking. Are you okay? He asked, his voice gentle. I nodded, just a little rattled. You were brave, he said, and right. I turned to look at him fully then. The young man beside me had his grandfather's steadiness, his quiet strength. In that moment, my chest ached not from grief, but pride. Would you like to come over for dinner tonight? I asked, the words leaving my mouth before I'd even planned them. Hess smiled. I'd love to. That evening, we sat across from each other at my kitchen table, sharing roasted chicken and mashed potatoes. Simple food. Real conversation. I told him everything. About the years of silent giving. The name tag. The diatribe from Carolyn. The call from Samuel. The clause. Wow, he said softly, sitting back in his chair. Grandpa really thought it through, didn't he? He did. I nodded. He always knew how to plan for storms. And now, I smiled faintly. Now, I plan. Quietly. I won't storm into battle. I'll observe. I'll wait. And I'll decide who deserves to be part of this legacy. Noah nodded. I want to earn that, not expect it. That night, I pulled out a notebook and began jotting ideas for the first time in years. Not for others. For me. Community classes, painting, maybe even traveling again. I had spent years giving pieces of myself away. But for the first time in a long while, I was ready to start keeping some. The morning light filtered through the lace curtains, dust dancing in soft golden beams across the oak floors. I hadn't meant to rise so early, but my body had decided before my mind could argue. It was just after 6 a.m. when I found myself in the study room Henry had always called his thinking place. Everything in that room was touched by time. The leather chair worn smooth by years of use. The bookshelf sagging slightly in the middle, like it was tired from carrying too many stories. The old lamp with its faded shade, which still gave off the warmest light in the house. I walked in slowly, trailing my hand across the shelves. I wasn't looking for anything in particular, but something tugged at mean instinct, maybe. Or simply the ghost of habit. Then I saw it. A small wooden box tucked between two thick law books. It was the size of a cigar case, made of dark walnut, with a brass clasp and Henry's initials carved into the lid. My breath caught. I reached for it carefully, as if touching something sacred. The box opened with a quiet creak, and inside, wrapped in a thin ribbon, were a stack of letters yellowed, soft-edged but neatly arranged. Each envelope had one word written on the front. For Maggie. My knees weakened. I sat down slowly in the leather chair, the letters cradled in my lap. I untied the ribbon and took the top one. The 12th of October, 1973. Dear Maggie, if you're reading this letter, it means I'm not there to tell you in person how much I love you. I hope I told you every day. I meant to. Sometimes we men think actions are enough. But I've learned that love needs words, too. You were 23 when I first saw you in that bakery on Main Street. You wore a yellow dress, and you had flour on your cheek. I remember thinking, there goes the rest of my life. I didn't just love you then. I admired you, still do. You were smarter than I ever was, and braver too. Don't let anyone convince you otherwise. If life gets hard after I'm gone, read one of these letters. I wrote them just in case. Love always. Henry? I pressed the paper to my lips, my eyes stinging. The second letter was dated a year later, then another from the 82nd, and the next from the day after Noah was born. Each letter was a different memory, a different moment, but they all shared the same voice-steady, loving, protective. Some were short, others pages long. He'd written them in hotel rooms, at the office, on the back porch during thunderstorms. One made me laugh. He'd tried to draw a cartoon version of us dancing in the kitchen, and it was terrible. Stick figures with giant feet. But I remembered the night it had rained, and the power had gone out, and we danced by candlelight. Another letter told me to trust my instincts. "You're the smartest person I know," he wrote, "even when you don't believe it." I spent nearly 3 hours reading them all. By the end, I was no longer crying. I felt fortified, like I'd been given a shield I didn't know I had. Those letters weren't just love notes. They were reminders of who I'd been, who I still was. Later that afternoon, Noah came by. He brought pastries from the French bakery downtown. "Felt like you could use something sweet," he said, handing me a box. "Did you make these?" I teased. "No," he laughed. But I picked them out very thoughtfully. We sat at the kitchen table, and I told him about the box, about the letters. "Can I see one?" he asked, his tone reverent. I hesitated, then handed him the letter from 1973. He read it quietly, eyes soft. "Grandpa really loved you," he said finally. "Like, the kind of love they write songs about." "He did," I nodded. "And he wanted me to remember it, especially when things got cloudy." We didn't talk for a while, just ate our pastries and watched the wind move through the trees outside the window. Then Noah cleared his throat. "Can I ask you something?" "Of course. What are you going to do about the clause? The inheritance thing?" I took a slow breath. "I'm not sure yet," I said. "But I know I won't let fear decide for me." He nodded. "That's fair." I looked at him closely. "Are you worried about it?" "A little," he admitted. "Not because of what I might lose, but because of what it says about our family." I reached for his hand. "Families are messy, but they're not broken beyond repair. Not always." That evening, I sat with a fresh cup of tea and began drafting a letter of my own. To David. It wasn't angry, or bitter, just honest. I told him what the clause meant. I told him why Henry had written it. And I told him that I had found the box of letters proof of the man his father had been, and the love he'd wanted us to remember. I asked him to think carefully about his choices, about how he treated me, about what kind of man he wanted to be remembered as. I didn't mail it yet, but I placed it beside Henry's final letter in the box. And for the first time in years, I felt no rush to fix everything. I just let it be. If you're still watching, comment one so I know you're still with me. It was a Tuesday afternoon when the doorbell rang. I was in the middle of pruning the roses in the front yard, wearing Henry's old sun hat that had become mine by silent adoption. The sun was mild, the breeze generous, and I had been humming a tune I didn't realize I remembered. Something from the 62nd, something with meaning. The bell rang again. I set down the pruning shears and brushed my hands against my apron. As I made my way to the door, I half expected it to be a delivery flowers, maybe, or another catalog I hadn't asked for. What I didn't expect was Carolyn, standing on my porch, lips tight, hands clutching her designer handbag like it was the last thread holding her together. "Maggie," she said, her voice controlled. "Carolyn," I replied, with just enough civility. "May I come in?" I studied her for a moment. The polished exterior was still there. The pearl earrings, the tailored blouse, the perfect manicure. But the eyes, they had lost their certainty. I nodded once and stepped aside. She walked in as if afraid the floor might give out beneath her. I led her to the sitting room and gestured to the floral armchair Henry had always disliked, too stiff, he'd said. She sat. I took the couch. We sat there in silence for a few beats. Then, without preamble, she said, "David told me about the clause." I nodded. She let out a shaky breath. "And the letter?" I nodded again. There was a pause, long enough for the grandfather clock to chime once. "You have to understand," she began, and already I could hear the rehearsed quality in her tone. "I never meant for things to become adversarial." I said nothing. "I was trying to protect our future," she continued. "The wedding, the house, the family name. These things matter." I tilted my head. "To whom?" She blinked. "To all of us, don't they?" I leaned back, folded my hands in my lap. "Carolyn, I spent 30 years watching you reshape David into someone I barely recognized. I thought if I stayed quiet, if I played the good mother, things would even out. They didn't," she said softly. No, I agreed. They didn't. Another silence. Then she looked down at her hands and said something I didn't expect. I'm scared. That broke the tension in the room like a crack in glass. I built my whole life on being in control, she continued. And now, I'm not. For the first time in years, I saw her not as an opponent, but as a woman unraveling. Not evil, just lost in a world she had built out of appearances. I softened just a little. I'm not here to take anything away from you, Carolyn, I said. I'm just no longer willing to give away what's mine without thought. She nodded slowly, absorbing the shift. I miss Henry, she said suddenly. He used to make space in a room just by walking in. I smiled, surprised by the shared memory. He did. And he saw through people faster than most. She let out a dry chuckle. That's probably why I never fooled him. I didn't deny it. There was a pause, a moment where something like peace hovered between us. Then she asked, "What now?" I looked out the window, where the wind had begun to stir the leaves. I don't know, I said honestly. But I know it won't look like what we've done before. The next morning, I found a handwritten note in the mailbox. It was from Lily. Dear Grandma, I'm sorry. For everything I didn't see and for the things I chose not to. I know I've been distant, but I love you. And I'm proud of you. We don't need Bali. We need family. Can we start over? Love, Lily. I sat with that note in my hand, the morning light warming my face. Some cracks can't be patched, but some, they let the light in. The afternoon sun poured through the kitchen windows, casting long shadows across the tile floor. I sat at the table with a cup of chamomile tea, Lily's letter beside me, folded and unfolded so many times it had begun to wear at the creases. I had read it more than once, not because I didn't understand it, but because it was the first true thing she had said to me in a long time. Not polished, not filtered, just honest. And it had cracked something open inside me in the best way. A knock at the door stirred me from my thoughts. This time, I didn't flinch. I simply stood, crossed the hallway, and opened it. Lily stood there, hair pulled back in a simple ponytail, her eyes rimmed with something that wasn't mascara. Hi, she said. Hi. Can I come in? I opened the door wide and stepped back. She walked in like she belonged, like she remembered what it meant to enter without performance. There was no dramatic apology, no grand speech. Just Lily, my granddaughter. The one who used to braid dandelions into crowns and place them on my head like I was a queen of summer. We ended up back in the kitchen, where everything always felt safer. I poured her a cup of tea and handed her the honey without being asked. She smiled. I missed this, she said softly. Me too. She looked down at her cup for a long moment, then finally said, I was wrong. About a lot of things. I didn't rush to fill the silence. She needed to say it, and I needed to let her. I wanted things to be perfect, she continued. The wedding, the image, the story I was telling everyone, especially myself. And when you didn't fit into that picture the way I imagined, I shut you out. I took a sip of my tea. Do you know why I didn't say anything sooner? I asked. She shook her head. Because I thought love meant staying quiet, I said. Letting others be happy, even if it hurt me. She blinked back tears. I thought I was honoring your memory, she whispered. But I was erasing your presence. I reached across the table and took her hand. It was cold. Or maybe mine was warm. We can't change the past, I said. But we can choose how much of it we carry forward. She nodded, squeezing my hand. Do you still have the letters? She asked. I smiled. I do. Can I read one? I hesitated, then stood and walked to the study. The box was still on the desk, right where I'd left it. I brought it back to the kitchen and placed it gently on the table. Lily reached for it like it might break in her hands. I watched her open the lid, eyes wide with reverence. She pulled out a letter from the top and opened it slowly. As she read, I watched her expression shift wonder, sadness, love. When she finished, she pressed the letter to her chest. I never really knew him, she said. You still can, I said softly, through his words. We sat there a long while, the box between us, like an invisible bridge. A few days later, she called again. this time with a nervous excitement in her voice. "Grandma," she said, "I've been thinking. Would you come speak at my school?" "Your school?" "I teach a creative writing elective now," she said. "Just once a week, but I love it. I told my students about you, about the letters. They want to meet you." I paused, heart fluttering. "You told them about me?" "Of course," she said. "You're the most resilient woman I know." I laughed softly. "They're just teenagers. What would I possibly say that could matter?" "You'd be surprised," she said. The following Wednesday, I found myself standing in front of a class of 17-year-olds, a bundle of nerves wrapped in floral fabric. Lily stood off to the side, giving me a reassuring nod. I told them about love letters, about the importance of writing things down, even if no one ever reads them, about memory and silence, and the power of telling your truth not for attention, but for healing. They asked questions. They listened. One boy with nervous eyes raised his hand. "Do you miss him?" "Every day," I said. "But missing him reminds me I was lucky enough to have something worth missing." They were quiet for a while after that. And in that stillness, I realized something. Healing doesn't always come in grand waves. Sometimes it tiptoes in quietly, through a door you finally leave open. Later that night, as I lay in bed, I thought about the letter I had written to David. It was still in the box, still unsent. Maybe it didn't need to be mailed. Maybe it had already done its job. If you're still watching, comment 1 so I know you're still with me. The house was quiet again. Too quiet, in the way homes become after a meaningful visit has ended, like the walls themselves are holding their breath, waiting for the next echo of laughter or the shuffle of familiar footsteps. I stood in the living room, teacup in hand, gazing at the worn armchair across from me, Henry's chair. No one had sat in it for months, not out of grief, but out of habit, respect, maybe even reverence. It felt like his absence still lived there, stitched into the fabric, settled in the cushions. But that morning, for reasons I didn't fully understand, I placed my teacup on the table and sat in it. It creaked beneath me like it remembered, like it recognized the weight of something it had long been waiting for. The scent of old leather and faint cologne lingered. I closed my eyes. "I miss you," I said softly. There was no reply, of course, but something about the silence felt less empty. Later that day, I decided to go to the bank. Not out of urgency, more a sense of clarity. After all the letters, the conversations, the remembering, I needed to know exactly where everything stood. Henry had always kept immaculate records, but I wanted to look through it all myself. I hadn't been to the downtown branch in over a year. The teller greeted me with a warm smile and called me Mrs. Reynolds, which still sounded strange after all this time. Inside the small office of Mr. Willis, our longtime financial advisor, I sat across from him while he pulled up the files. "You know," he said gently, "Henry kept everything in perfect order. His estate, the trust, the accounts, it's all intact." "I know," I said, "but I want to understand it for myself now." He nodded and began explaining line by line. There was more than I expected. Investments I didn't know we had. Donations made anonymously over the years. A children's literacy fund Henry had started in my name without ever telling me. "He said it was for the quiet work you did behind the scenes," Mr. Willis explained. "He wanted to honor that in a way that would last." Tears blurred my vision. I blinked them away and smiled. He always did know how to show love in his own quiet ways. Mr. Willis hesitated, then said, "He left a note in the file for you. Would you like to read it now?" My breath caught. He handed me a sealed envelope, yellowed at the corners. "Madji, in case you ever need reminding, you were always the best part of everything I built. Henry." I closed my eyes and held the letter to my chest. Even in death, he knew how to steady me. That evening, I cooked dinner. A real one, not soup or toast or something pulled from the freezer. I made baked chicken with rosemary, mashed sweet potatoes, and green beans with almonds. I played music while I cooked Frank Sinatra, then Ella Fitzgerald, then a little Simon and Garfunkel. The house felt full again. I set the table for 2, and then I sat at one end. At the other, I placed the letter. Not because I thought Henry might walk through the door, I knew better than that, but because it felt right, like something deserved to be honored, like I was finally learning how to be with my memories instead of trapped inside them. I ate slowly, tasting every bite. When I finished, I didn't cry. I cleaned the kitchen, humming the way I used to when Lily was little, and the world felt simple and wide open. Later, I called Noah. I want to do something, I told him. Something more than just sit here remembering. What do you have in mind? He asked. I want to start a community writing group for women, especially older women who've been told their stories don't matter anymore. He was quiet for a moment, then said, That's the best idea I've ever heard. I just need a space, and maybe some folding chairs. I'll help you, he said immediately. We'll make it happen. A week later, the church on Maple Street offered us their basement room every Thursday evening. The pastor's wife even offered to bake cookies. Flyers went up in coffee shops, the library, the grocery store. Right to remember. A weekly circle for women who want to tell their stories, all ages welcome. The first night, I expected maybe 3 or 4. 12 women showed up, some with notebooks, some with trembling hands, all with eyes that had seen things, births and deaths, quiet disappointments, small joys, heartbreak that never made headlines. I welcomed them, poured tea, and asked one question. What is a memory you've never shared with anyone, but still think about? For 2 hours, the room filled with laughter, tears, long silences, and soft nods. It was the most alive I'd felt in years. Not because I was leading, but because I was listening. When I got home that night, I sat in Henry's chair again. I whispered, You'd be proud. And in the stillness, I could almost hear him say, I always was. It was late September when the letter came. Not one of Henry's, not a bank notice or a holiday flyer, but a cream-colored envelope with careful handwriting on the front. Margaret Reynolds, Pine Hill Lane, Oak Ridge, Vermont. Inside was a folded piece of stationery, thick, textured, with a light scent of lavender. The kind of paper people used when they wanted to say something that mattered. It was from Lily. Dear Grandma, Ethan and I are hosting a family dinner next Sunday. Nothing fancy, just us, some food, and a table to sit around. We'd love for you to come. Love, Lily. No grand speech, no apologies, just an open door. And for the first time in a long while, I didn't hesitate. The day arrived with golden leaves scattered across the sidewalk, crunching under my shoes as I made my way to Lily's house, the little white colonial 2 blocks from the bookstore. I had watched it being built when Lily was still a teenager, never thinking it would one day hold pieces of her grown-up life. When I reached the door, I paused, not out of fear, but out of memory, of all the Thanksgivings and birthdays and quiet Sunday roasts we used to have. It had been a while since I'd felt part of something like that. Lily opened the door before I could knock. Hi, Grandma, she said, pulling me into a hug. I breathed in the scent of her shampoo and something warm from the oven. It was home, not mine, but familiar enough to feel safe. Inside, Ethan was setting the table, carefully placing napkins beside each plate. He looked up and smiled. Hi, Mrs. Reynolds. Just Maggie, I said, returning the smile. There was something softer in him now, less performative, like they'd both stopped trying to be perfect and started being real. Dinner was roasted chicken, rosemary potatoes, salad with cranberries and pecans. Nothing elaborate, but made with care, made with thought. David arrived last. He didn't say much at first, just a nod, a half smile. I nodded back. We sat down together. The table wasn't large, but it held space for all of us. And for a moment, there was silence. Then Lily raised her glass. To new seasons, Ethan added, and second chances. I looked at them, these 2 young people, still learning how to build something lasting, and I smiled. To family, I said quietly. We clinked glasses, and we ate. After dessert, a pear tart I'd brought with too much cinnamon and not enough perfection, David asked if we could talk. Just the 2 of us. We stepped onto the porch. The air was crisp, the kind that hinted at October. He stood there, hands in his pockets, the way Henry used to when he didn't know where to begin. I read the letter, he said finally. The one you didn't send. My heart stilled. I went to your house last week. Lily let me in. Said you wouldn't mind. I nodded slowly. I don't. He looked at me, really looked not through me, not past me. "You were right," he said. "About a lot of things. About me." I didn't say anything. Sometimes silence says more. He took a deep breath. I forgot who I was supposed to be. Somewhere along the way, I let titles and expectations and Carolyn shape me into something else. And I let them push you out. There it was. The thing I had waited years to hear, not from my pride, but for the boy I once raised. The one who used to bring me dandelions and call me his best girl. "I missed you," he said. His voice cracked. I just didn't know how to say it. I reached for his hand. "Now you have." He squeezed back, eyes damp. "Do you think we could try again?" "Family isn't something you lose in a day," I said softly. "And it's not something you fix in one either. But yes, we can try." He nodded. And for the first time in a long time, I saw my son again. Later that night, back home, I lit a candle in the kitchen window, an old habit I'd picked up from my mother. She used to say it was a way of letting the world know there was still warmth waiting inside. I sat at the table, tea in hand, and opened a fresh notebook. Not Henry's letters this time. Mine. I started with a simple line. "This is what healing looks like." And then I kept writing. On the first Thursday of October, it rained. Not a soft drizzle, but a steady, cleansing rain, the kind that painted the sidewalks dark and made the maple trees shimmer like gold against the gray sky. I arrived at the church basement early, carrying a basket of ginger cookies and a stack of fresh notepads I had bought at the dollar store. The room smelled faintly of lemon cleaner and old hymnals, and I found comfort in that. 10 minutes later, the door creaked open. It was Ruth, a retired nurse with stiff hands and eyes that had seen more than most. She walked with a slow, deliberate gait, but there was something fierce in the way she held her chin up. "Do you think anyone else will come in this weather?" she asked, shaking off her umbrella. "I hope so," I said. "But if not, 2 is enough." She smiled at that. 2 is more than silence. By 6:15, 6 women had gathered. Marion, who had recently buried her husband and still wore her wedding ring on a chain. Irene, who never missed a week and always brought a thermos of strong coffee just in case the tea is too weak. June and Eliza, best friends since high school, now widowed and rediscovering the joy of laughter together. And Gloria, who hadn't spoken much the first 2 weeks but now carried a worn leather journal under her arm. We sat in a circle, steam rising from mismatched mugs, pens clicking open. There was a kind of holiness in that room, not the sermon kind, but the sacred kind born from truth-telling. "Tonight," I said, "let's write about something we never dared to say out loud." Eyes lifted. "I don't mean secrets, necessarily," I added, "but those quiet truths we bury under politeness or fear. The ones that whisper in the middle of the night." There was a pause, and then Gloria, of all people, spoke first. "I'll go," she said, voice steady. "If I don't now, I might never." And she began. Gloria's story was about her mother. Not a villain, not a saint. Just a woman caught in her own pain, unable to show love the way a child needs. Gloria read about birthdays spent waiting by the window, about learning to stop asking for hugs, about finally forgiving someone who never apologized. By the time she finished, no one spoke. Not because we didn't want to, but because we couldn't. The room was thick with emotion, thick with understanding. When I finally cleared my throat, I said, "Thank you. That was brave." Gloria just nodded and passed the journal to her lap like it weighed nothing now. That night, every woman shared something. Some stories were quiet, just a few sentences whispered into the safety of our circle. Others were long, spilling out like they'd been waiting decades to be heard. We laughed. We cried. We refilled mugs. We paused when the memories got too heavy. We started again. And by the end of the night, the rain had stopped both outside and inside. A week later, I received a letter in the mail. "Mrs. Reynolds, I heard about your writing group at church. My sister attends and hasn't stopped talking about it. Would you consider opening it to men as well? With respect, Tom Barrett." I stared at the letter for a long while. Then I picked up the phone. The following Thursday, we added 2 more chairs. Tom showed up in a navy cardigan, smelling faintly of pipe, tobacco, and old books. He was a retired literature professor with a sharp wit and a surprising fondness for romantic poetry. The other was Walter Tall, soft-spoken, a former mechanic who had lost his wife 3 years ago and still wore her wedding band on a chain around his neck. They didn't speak much that first night, just listened. But their presence shifted the energy of the room in the best way. Not louder, just wider. By the third week, Walter read a letter he'd written to his wife, about how he still set her place at the table, about how the silence at breakfast sometimes felt like punishment and sometimes felt like peace. No one interrupted. No one looked away. The circle had grown not just in numbers, but in courage. And I felt something blooming inside me I hadn't felt in years. Purpose. One afternoon, Noah stopped by with a bag of groceries and that same grin that reminded me so much of Henry. "I got the good butter," he said proudly. "And your favorite tea?" I watched him unpack things while I prepped the dough for biscuits. "You know," he said, "you've kind of started a movement." I laughed. "A movement?" "Well," he shrugged, "people talk. The library board wants to fund your group. The pastor mentioned it in last Sunday's sermon, and I think Lily's thinking about starting a youth version at her school." I blinked, surprised. "Really?" He nodded. "You gave people a place to be real, Grandma. That matters." I looked at him, this young man with kind eyes and steady hands, and felt my chest swell. "I didn't expect any of this," I said. "Maybe not," he replied. "But you invited it by being brave." That night, after he left, I lit a fire in the living room and sat in Henry's chair. On the table beside me, I placed the notebook I'd started weeks ago, and slowly, I began writing a new story. Not about grief, not about regret, but about reinvention. Quiet, slow, and made from pieces I had once given away, now stitched back together into something whole. It had been nearly 2 months since I found Henry's letters. 2 months since the first gathering in the church basement. Since Noah told me I'd started a movement. Since Lily looked at me like she finally saw me. And yet, one thing remained untouched. The letter to David. It sat in the same wooden box, beneath Henry's final note. Sealed, but never sent. I'd opened the box a dozen times, touched the envelope like a talisman, but I never brought myself to read it again or mail it. Until today. It was a quiet Saturday morning. The kind Henry would have spent mowing the lawn while humming old country tunes. I made myself a proper breakfast. Eggs, toast, blackberries from the backyard, and sat at the kitchen table with a steaming mug of tea. I opened the box. The letter looked exactly the same. My hands didn't tremble this time as I lifted it. The paper felt lighter. Or maybe I was just heavier with resolve. I opened it and read, "David, I'm writing this not to accuse or punish you, but because I want you to see clearly. You've grown into a man who chases safety disguised as success. You protect status instead of people. And somewhere along the way, I stopped recognizing you. But I also know this. People change when they're truly seen. When someone holds a mirror up without flinching. Your father believed in consequences not out of cruelty, but to protect what mattered. And he believed in you. So do I. This clause wasn't written in anger. It was written in love, the kind that expects more. I hope one day you understand that. With honesty and love. Mom. Asterisk asterisk. I folded the letter slowly, pressing the crease with my thumb. And then, finally, I knew. I wouldn't send it. Not because the words weren't true, they were, but because they had already done their work in me. Writing it helped me speak truths I had long buried. Reading it helped me release the grip of old expectations, and choosing not to send it, that was for me too. Because healing isn't always about confrontation. Sometimes, it's about clarity and letting go. That afternoon, I was in the garden pulling weeds when I heard a familiar voice. "Grandma." I stood and wiped my hands on my apron. "David." He stood at the gate, unsure, like a boy again. His shoulders hunched, his hands in his pockets, wearing the face of a man who had run out of excuses. "I was driving by," he said, "and I don't know why I stopped." I didn't answer. I waited. He stepped inside the gate, slowly. "I got your message," he said. My brows furrowed. "What message?" He looked down. Lily showed me the letter. The one from Henry. The one in the file. "Ah, That message. I didn't mean to read it, he said. But once I started, I couldn't stop. I nodded slowly, letting him sit in that moment. I've been angry, he admitted. At you. At Dad. At myself. But mostly, I've been scared. I felt something inside me soften, though not without caution. He looked around the garden. This place always made me feel small. Because you didn't know how much work it took to keep it alive, I said gently. He looked at me. And now I do. I gestured toward the bench under the magnolia tree. Sit with me. He did. There was a long silence, the kind only shared by people who have failed each other in quiet ways. I don't expect anything, he said at last. I just wanted you to know I'm trying. That's more than I thought I'd hear, I said. Thank you. He nodded. I miss Dad. I know. I miss you too. Tears welled in my eyes, but I didn't let them fall. David, I said, your father didn't write that clause to punish you. He wrote it to give you a chance to choose who you want to be, not just what you want to have. He looked away, ashamed. I failed him. You still have time. Later that night, I sat at my desk with a fresh piece of paper. Not a letter this time, but a plan. I would add a new clause to the trust, one that reflected growth, not control. One that said, redemption matters. Effort matters. Time doesn't erase everything, but it makes room for something new. The pen felt steady in my hand, and for the first time since Henry passed, I didn't feel like I was guarding a legacy. I felt like I was shaping it. If you're still watching, comment 1 so I know you're still with me. The autumn wind had begun to change. It was crisper now, carrying the scent of wood smoke and fallen leaves, the kind of breeze that made you reach for a sweater before stepping outside. I had always loved this time of year not for the chill, but for the quiet promise of something ending and something beginning. In the past, this season had marked years of family photos in pumpkin patches, of carving pies with Henry humming in the kitchen, of setting out candles shaped like tiny turkeys. But this year felt different. Not because I had less, but because I had finally realized what I still had to give. I woke up one morning with a phrase in my head. A simple one, but persistent. What's left to give? It stayed with me through breakfast, through my walk around the block, through folding laundry and feeding the cat that had taken to visiting my back porch. It followed me like a question waiting to be answered. That afternoon, I took out the box again, the one with Henry's letters. I didn't read them this time. Instead, I added something to it. A new letter. My own. Not for David, not for Lily, not for Noah, but for someone I didn't know yet. Dear you, if you're reading this, it means you've stumbled upon something once meant only for me. But if you're holding it, I trust that means you needed it more. I wrote for pages. About love. About grief. About the quiet kind of strength that takes root when the storms don't stop. But you choose to stand anyway. I wrote about Henry not just as a husband, but as a man who left room for people to grow. I wrote about the women in the church basement, about Noah's gentleness, about forgiveness that doesn't always come with a bow. And then I sealed the letter and tucked it beneath Henry's first note. That night, I made a decision. I called Lily. Would you help me do something? I asked. Of course, she said immediately. We spent the next week designing a small website, just a simple page with a photo of the writing circle, a brief description, and a form where people could write in anonymously, requesting a letter. Any kind of letter. From a grandmother. From someone who had lived a little, failed a little, and still believed in kindness. We called it Words from Maggie. The first message came within an hour of the site going live. A young woman named Marissa, 19, college freshman, homesick and lonely, wondering if she'd made a mistake leaving her small town. The second was from a retired mailman in Arizona. No family left. He missed being useful. The third was from a single mother in Maine who hadn't heard anyone say, "I see you" in years. I spent the next month writing letters, dozens of them, all handwritten, all signed simply, Maggie. Some were full of stories. Others were quiet encouragements. One was a list of favorite Frank Sinatra songs for a boy who said music helped him sleep. I didn't tell most people I was doing it, but word spread. By December, a librarian in Kansas started printing out the letters to display on a community board. A hospice nurse in Michigan read them aloud to her patients. A pastor in Alabama asked if I'd be willing to share them with the church's shut-ins. I didn't set out to become anything. I just wanted to remind people that they weren't alone. And the letters, they reminded me, too. One evening, as I was sealing another stack of envelopes, Noah came over with a bag of groceries and a proud smile. "You're going to need more stamps," he said, setting the bag on the counter. "You think so?" I asked, arching a brow. "I know so," he grinned. "The school's doing a project. Every student's writing a letter to someone in the community and they want you to write back." I paused. "All of them?" "Only 74, he said with a wink. I laughed. The sound felt full, whole. "I'll get started tomorrow," I promised. He leaned against the counter, watching me carefully. "You're happy," he said. "I am," I replied, surprised by the truth of it. "I think Grandpa would be proud." "I think he already was." Noah nodded. "You gave so much for so long, and now you're giving something new." "Not just giving," I said, handing him an envelope. "I'm remembering who I am." That night, I sat in Henry's chair one more time. Outside, the wind had picked up, scattering leaves across the porch. Inside, I held one last letter in my hands. This one wasn't for anyone else. It was for me. "Dear Margaret, you did the hard thing. You stayed. You softened when bitterness tried to harden you. You chose to love, to listen, to begin again. You're not the same woman you were, and that's a good thing. Keep writing. Keep loving. Keep choosing peace over pride. There's still so much more to give." I folded the letter gently and placed it in the box. Not to be sent, but to be found. One January morning, a thin layer of snow fell on the porch like a light coating of sugar on a cake. I stood by the window, a cup of hot cocoa in my hand, looking out at the garden, now reduced to tree stumps and the last few leaves clinging to the branches. I no longer feel empty when I look at this scene, no longer expect anything to go back to the way it was. Instead, I found myself calm like a lake that had just been through a storm, now reflecting the early morning sunlight. Noah stopped by around noon, carrying a wooden box. "What's in it?" I asked. "It's what you made it," it laughed. I opened the box. Inside were copies of dozens of letters I had written secretly printed by Lily and Noah. Each letter was carefully folded and contained in an envelope marked "Words from Maggie." "I think you should make it into a book," Noah said. "Not to be famous, just to keep, so that people who need it can find it." I touched the paper, each familiar stroke of my own handwriting, each sentence sent to a stranger but touching me back. I nodded slowly. "Then let's start with the name first." 3 weeks later, I sat in on the first meeting of the New Year's writing group. There were now more than 20 of us, young and old, women and men, widows, divorcees, and never-married people. But we all had something in common. We all had stories that had never been fully told. This time, I brought with me the first manuscript of my book, Unsent Letters, Whispers from a Grandmother. I read a few small passages. No one spoke for the first 10 minutes. Then Gloria, the woman who had been the quietest in the group, pulled out a tissue and said softly, "Thank you for giving us the courage to rewrite ourselves." That evening, when I returned home, a handwritten letter was waiting in the mailbox. There was no sender's name. I opened it. The handwriting was slanted and slightly shaky. "Dear Madgie, I've never met you, but a friend forwarded me the letter you wrote to the man who lost his wife. I am that woman. I've read it 12 times, and today was the first time in 3 years that I left the house in the morning. Just wanted to say thank you. And I'm learning to start over. A." I folded the letter, my hands shaking slightly but my heart feeling light. No applause needed. No bestseller needed. Just someone, somewhere, gets to move on, thanks to words from the heart. March comes earlier than every year. The snow melted into puddles along the path, and the buds in the garden began to emerge, hesitantly but stubbornly. There was a smell of damp earth and daffodils in the air, as if nature itself were taking a deep breath after its winter slumber. I made jasmine tea, opened the window, and let the cool breeze flow into the kitchen. The Words from Maggie plaque now hangs in the living room, next to an old photo of Henry and Muir wedding day in 1974, where we both smiled like we had the world under our belts. That afternoon, Lily stopped by, carrying a stack of papers and sparkling eyes. "Grandma," she said, "my school is having a multi-generational talk. I told them about you and the writing group. They want to invite you to be the keynote speaker." I raised an eyebrow. "You? The speaker?" Lily smiled. "Not to teach, but to tell stories. About memories, about love, about things no one taught you that saved you." I put down my teacup. "Do you think they would listen to an old woman telling a love story?" Lily took my hand. "They're not just listening, Grandma. They're waiting to see that life can be beautiful after loss." 3 weeks later, I stood on the small stage of the high school library, before hundreds of curious young eyes. My heart was pounding like it had when I was a girl holding a microphone for the first time in church. I didn't bring the article. I only brought a letter, folded neatly in my coat pocket. I told him about Henry, about the old letters, about the day I sat alone at the dinner table, placing the letter on the empty chair as a farewell. I tell about David, about disappointment, then hope, about Gloria, Walter, and the people who chose to start over, even though no one applauded or posted about them. "Sometimes," I said, my voice slow but clear, "the bravest thing you can do is to continue writing your story, no matter how sad the previous chapters were." The whole room was silent, then a long applause. Not because I stand out, but because I am honest. That evening, I sat in the back garden, next to the row of newly blooming daffodils. In my hand was a blank sheet of paper. This time, I'm not writing to strangers. No to the past. Not even a word of goodbye. I write for tomorrow. Dear tomorrow, I'm ready for you. Not because I've finished healing, but because I'm learning to begin over and over, with love, and letters, and open windows. Madgie, if you're still watching, comment 1 so I know you're still with me. April brings mild sunny days and nights, just cold enough to keep the wool blanket on the bed still precious. One Friday morning, as I was fertilizing the roses on the porch, Noah walked into the yard with a strange look in his eyes. Not sadness, not worry, but gentle excitement. "Grandma," he said, his hands behind his back, "I have an idea." I wiped my hands on my apron. "I hope it's not a chicken coop in the yard." Noah laughed loudly, then held out 2 train tickets. "This weekend. Train ride up the mountain. A night in a little log cabin we found. Not far, but enough to get some fresh air." I was about to decline, as is my habit, but then I remembered something I had written. "Keep choosing peace over pride." I nodded. "I will go." The train left on Saturday morning. Every beat of the wheels reminded me of the times Henry and I had traveled back home, holding hands in warm silence. I didn't have much, just an old leather bag, a notebook, and a few unwritten letters. Noah and I sat by the window, watching the pines go by, smelling the rotting leaves and old rain soaking into the ground. Neither of us said much. We didn't need to. When we arrived, the wooden cabin nestled on a small lake was as quiet as a hushed dream. I spent most of my time sitting on a wooden bench on the porch, writing letters, watching the wind sweep across the water, and sometimes just sitting there. That night, I had a dream. In the dream, Henry was no younger, nor did he age. He was still himself with a slow smile and knowing eyes. "You have done more than expected," he said. "I just wrote a few letters," I replied. He laughed. "You rebuilt a bridge." I woke up near dawn. Tears dried on my cheeks, but my heart was as light as morning dew. The next morning, while Noah was making coffee, I sat down to write my final letter. "Dear reader, this is not goodbye, because what we give in love, in stories, in courage, it lives on. In benches beneath magnolia trees, print ink-stained envelopes, and strangers no longer feel alone. You've been reading my journey. Now it's time to write yours. With love always, Madgie." When I got home, I carefully placed the letter in the old wooden box where Henry's first letters had been sent. I left the box unlocked. No need to. Epilogue. A few months later, a young woman from another state wrote a letter asking to join the writing group. She signed her name as Marissa. In the note, she wrote, I received a letter from someone named Maggie last year. It didn't change my life. It saved it. That afternoon, Margaret sat on the porch, a cup of warm chamomile tea in her hand. It was truly autumn. The sunlight slanted through the red maple branches, and the wind blew gently, just enough to make the leaves fall one by one, like time shedding itself bit by bit. On the wooden table next to her was a pile of letters unsent, half-written, and a few recently answered. No longer were she writing alone. Now, she wrote to connect. The sparrows flew back to their nest in the ginkgo tree in the front yard. Margaret smiled. There was a real peace in the regularity of nature, a kind of simple faith that everything would fall back into place, if only we waited patiently. She looked down at the piece of paper she had been writing. It was to an one-year-old boy in Oregon who had written that he didn't know who his father was and felt invisible. She had sat for hours trying to find the words. Not advice, but listening. My dear child, I don't know you beyond what you've written, but I know what it feels like to feel unworthy of being seen. And I want you to know, your presence is enough. You are not invisible. You are learning to walk in a world that has never properly welcomed you, but you walk anyway, and that is a brave thing. Margaret signed simply, as always, Maggie, my distant grandmother. She folded the letter, put it in an envelope, carefully stamped it, and placed it in the wicker basket by the door where Noah would come to pick it up and drop it off every Monday. The afternoon shadows stretched across the lawn. She stood up, gently rubbing her knuckles. Her heart was no longer as fast as before. It had learned to slow down, to love a simple but meaningful life. That evening, Lily came home. The young girl was different now. There was something deep in her eyes. She no longer wore elaborate makeup like before. Her hair was simply loose, and she was holding a briefcase. I brought this for you to see, she said, placing the bag on the dining table. Inside was a proposal for an after-school program called Letters from Home, an activity for students to write letters by hand to cultivate emotions, connection, and healing. Inspired by Margaret herself, and the letters she wrote to the world. The school approved it, Lily said, her eyes welling up. They even asked if you would come to the first commencement. Margaret looked at her granddaughter, and a soft feeling welled up in her heart. Not simple pride, but the feeling of seeing a humble seed she had sown, now sprouting in another soil. I will come, she said, her voice firm. On Sunday morning, Margaret returned to the old church not to sit in the back pew, but to stand up front, with Lily, in front of more than 300 students, teachers, and parents. As she stepped up to the small podium, holding a piece of paper in her hand, the room fell silent. Hello, she began softly. My name is Margaret, but a lot of people these days call me Magathy Distant Grandmother. There was a soft chuckle. She smiled and continued. I am not a writer. I am just a woman who thought she had run out of things to give. Until I wrote a letter, then another, and another, to a stranger, to myself. She stopped and looked around the room. I'm not here to preach. I'm here to say this. Each of us has a story worth telling. Whether you're young or old, whether you've been wrong or hurt, you deserve to be heard and seen. The whole room was silent. Not a cough, not a wandering eye. Writing a letter won't save the world, but it will save a day, a heart, a little piece of someone who is tired. And sometimes, that's enough. She stepped down from the podium to sustained applause. Not the kind of applause for a celebrity, but the kind of applause for someone who has touched something in their heart that they thought they had forgotten. That evening, Margaret returned home. She went into her room, took out the familiar wooden box, and opened it. In addition to Henry's letters, there were now hundreds more from strangers. A few shaky handwritings, a few childish scribbles, a few old Polaroids. All were responses to the love she had sent. She lit a small candle, sat down in a chair, and looked out the window. The autumn wind blew through the garden, and the yellow leaves were blown away. Margaret knew that time would pass, health would fail, and life would eventually end. But in her heart at this moment there is nothing left unfinished. No words left unsaid. There are no more unnamed wounds. There is no part of her that she does not understand. Because she forgave. Because she believed. And because she chose to start over with everything she still had to give, winter came late that year. The first snow fell lightly on a Saturday morning, coating the roof tiles in a thin layer of white like the icing on a cake she had made when Lily was a child. Margaret stood by the window, holding a cup of hot cocoa, feeling something she had thought she had forgotten. Fullness. Not the kind of fulfillment that comes from big things, but the feeling of having lived fully, having loved deeply enough, having forgiven widely enough, and having become yourself without hesitation, without needing permission. The little house had changed, not because of the new furniture, but because of the atmosphere. Warm, gentle, and filled with stories told with all the heart. Gingerbread cookies were always available in the kitchen. The writing desk in the living room was now where Grandma wrote every morning, not just letters but notes, diaries, even a small book that Lily was helping her edit. The last letter from Grandma Maggie. The church writing group has become an integral part of the community. Every week, more and more people come not just to write, but to listen to each other, to support each other. Some people who once couldn't speak a word now inspire the group. One particular evening, Ruth, the quietest woman in the group, brought in a book of poems. She read them in a trembling voice, and when she finished, the whole room stood up and applauded. Not because the poems were good, but because it was the first time Ruth had dared to tell what she had kept hidden for 50 years. Margaret sat listening, her hand gently placed on her heart, silently thanking Henry. Noah still visited every week, bringing good news from school, from the letter group, and stories of his new lover that he timidly shared. Margaret listened, smiling, never interrupting. The boy had become a sympathetic man, and she knew Henry would smile back in relief. Lily was different. She was still busy, still animated, but her gaze was softer now. No longer the girl who chased after big things, but a woman who appreciated the little things. She took Margaret to speak at school, took her to meetings with other women's groups. Once, Lily said through tears, she didn't just save herself, she saved me. Margaret held her granddaughter in her arms, her heart beating as calmly as the waves hitting the shore, steady, full. Late one afternoon in late December, Margaret sat down to write her last letter of the year. She had no idea who it was, for only that they had asked for a letter about hope when life has nothing left to cling to. She pondered for a moment, then wrote, "Dear child, I don't know what you're going through, but I believe that if you can still write these lines, it means that there is still a small seed of hope in you, even the most fragile one. Water it with kindness to yourself. Cover it with silence when you're tired. And trust that, one day, it will sprout into a life you never imagined. Not easy, but true. Love from Grandma, Maggie." She folded the letter, stamped it, and placed it on the top shelf of the basket as she always did. That evening, the snow fell harder. Margaret lit the fireplace, put on an old Frank Sinatra song, and sat in Henry's chair. On the table beside her was a cup of peppermint tea and a brand new notebook, a New Year's notebook. She did not write in a hurry. She just turned the pages gently, smelled the new paper, and smiled. "We've come a long way, Henry," she whispered. "I didn't think we'd get here, but we've come." The dancing fire reflected in her eyes. And in that small house, in the middle of a white winter, a woman who once thought she had lost everything now knows that she still has the most precious thing. Heart, still beating, still loving, and still giving. What she had once thought of as weakness, the tears, the trembling hands, the hesitant confessions now emerged as the purest expression of strength. There is a sacredness in facing your own journey with courage, in appreciating the quiet miracles of perseverance. Margaret now understood that people are not only what they do, but also what they overcome. Forgiveness, she realized, is not a flash in the pan, but a gradual process of untangling like a knot that is loosened bit by bit. Forgiveness does not erase the past, it clarifies the path forward. Spiritual healing, she discovered, often begins with the courage to speak a long-buried truth. Even the deepest pain, when received with compassion, can become the starting point of something redemptive. Faith, Henry once told her, is not certainty, it is trust, especially in things not seen. She no longer sought apologies that never came. Instead, she chose to make peace with silence. Now she finds God not in churches or hymns, but in handwritten letters, in expressed grief, in quietly shared cups of tea. The women in the writing group became her cathedral, and the stories they shared were hymns of survival. To forgive is to choose freedom not for others, but for yourself. Margaret understands that people are not just their actions, but also how they survive trauma. Even the deepest pain, when received with grace, can be the beginning of rebirth. She no longer seeks perfection or complete endings. She learns to appreciate new beginnings, no matter how small. Looking back, Margaret realizes that she didn't just survive the sadness, she grew from it. Her story is no longer defined by her losses, but by what she chose to give away in the wake of her losses. In learning to forgive others, she eventually learned to forgive herself. She now understands that Henry's legacy lies not in his possessions or his money, but in the space he opened up for others to start over. In the silence of her heart, she whispered a word of thanks to life, to pain, to forgiveness for making her whole. Perhaps the most precious thing in life is not what we own, but what we leave in the hearts of others. Margaret didn't need to be anyone else. She just needed to be herself, a mother, a wife, an anonymous letter writer, and an indispensable part of other people's journeys. If you've ever felt lost, if you still have unwritten letters in your heart, this story is for you. Thank you for accompanying me through each chapter of this touching story. If the story touches your heart, please leave a comment below. W. Sharing what you think the most. And if you want to continue listening to profound stories like this, don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel. Wishing you a peaceful evening and sweet dreams.